Child kings are often difficult to evaluate from a historical standpoint. In reality, it's the regents and underlings that prop an immature king up. While 11 years old isn't necessarily an age of complete incompetence for children, it certainly is one which could use some adult guidance. In this case, Reynold is guided by his older sisters and cousin. When his father Roland passed away, he made the revolutionary decision to allow his daughters an inheritance. Andalusia, Burgundy, and England were given to Ostroberta, Reynold's cousin and heir for the time being. His youngest sister, Philauba, controls Aquitaine, and his older half-sister, Austrashild, rules Brittany and Wales. These three women are the most powerful nobles of the realm, and their decisions will drive the realm. This period marks the beginning of the matriarchal triumvirate of free Rome. Being raised in the court of a realm in nearly complete peace, Reynold had an unusual upbringing. Where his ancestors mostly dealt with issues of war and economics, he instead had to learn about the whispers of the court. He learned early on that what his advisors say and what they mean isn't always the same thing. This made him a paranoid kid who often found himself at odds with his kind personality. He wanted to be good to people, but all too often people had intentions he could never know. While on his way to adulthood, the Pope declared yet another dead-on-arrival crusade, which was put down without any worry. It was mostly the realm matriarchs that handled the issue, leaving Reynold yet more sheltered. As well, news of a far-off conqueror, Temujin, spread around Europe and was also ignored by the Merovingian court. How could some tribal far-off in the east affect politics here? Thus, the news was discarded and the court moved on to more pressing matters. One formative experience of Reynold's youth was his first crush as a child. He developed feelings for a commoner named Adelinda. Normally, nobles and commoners don't interact much, but being the emperor's realm as Rome, Reynold could do as he wished. What he learned from Adelinda was that love was more than just about feelings and care for others. Love was also about control. With love, Reynold could have power over others without even forcing them to. He could ensure trust in a person without ever forcing them, because once Adelinda and Reynold became friends, and even mutual crushes, she was loyal to him completely. Reynold of course had to contend with his own feelings towards her, but being a wily emperor, he could of course control himself. This reality was the best of both worlds for him, as he didn't want to force anyone to obey him. It felt uncompassionate, but he still needed loyalty and control over others to do his job. Upon reaching adulthood, Reynold, despite being a student of court intrigue, ended up graduating as a conscientious scribe. Stepping out for a second, I believe this was a glitch. Not sure how it happened. He should be in intrigue education, but whatever, we'll call it an additional challenge, I suppose. The lessons we learn as kids often are the guides that take us through the trials of life. For Reynold, he had a strange upbringing where his most impressionable moments had to do with fear and control. He's no coward, but he sees threats in every corner. Despite the matriarchs generally being supportive of Reynold and loyal to him, they still have to be reined in. The potential of harm, no matter how unlikely, ought to be controlled, and the best way to do that was with what Reynold knew best: love. Before you get too weirded out by this, don't worry, he's not just romancing and seducing his sisters, he's marrying them. It's a legal marriage, so now it's not weird, trust me. Through both love and legal marriage, the matriarchs will be forced to be loyal to him. The funny thing about all this is how paranoia drives it in every way. The matriarchs have shown absolutely zero desire to rebel, but they're more than happy to become empresses rather than just queens, even if only by marriage. With these marriages, the realm's subdomains can be united and ensure the success of all of the heirs for everyone. Well, success in the sense of their worldly domain. Will these children face immense genetic issues? Probably. What's a humpback in return for an empire? A clubfoot isn't so bad when your servants do everything for you. Indeed, the humpback's son did come, Clodion, the first of Reynold's heirs. He was born to Reynold's sister, Philauba, and although a genius, did suffer from an arched back. Was that Zeus's way of showing his discontent with the incestuous marriage? Surely not. So with that in mind, Reynold also got married to his much older sister, Austrashild. Although she was far too old to bear children, an alliance would still be forged. Austrashild actually never had any children, meaning her land will be inherited by her cousin in Andalusia, Ostroberta. These names are way too similar, I kinda hate it. To make things very clear, by the way, these are not just political marriages. Ostroberta of Andalusia is in fact soulmates with Reynold, and the other queens are his lovers. This is a very passionate series of relationships which also happen to be beneficial politically. For Reynold, it was more about the politics, but he couldn't pretend that he didn't enjoy the presence of his family to support him. Beyond the internal politics of the realm, Reynold was focusing on the external as well. He has a few major goals, one of which is the true conquest of Hispania. Although his father had laid a lot of groundwork for it, he abandoned his work to focus on the Free Rome project. Reynold would be spreading free Roman ideals to the rest of the neighborhood. That includes Britannia, Hispania, and Francia, all of which were only natural expansion routes for the realm. As unexpected as it was, the first matriarch to pass away was actually Ostroberta of Andalusia. She died under mysterious circumstances which resulted in her realm splitting between her daughters, Illigardus of Andalusia and Burgundy, and Caesarea of England. The two girls were too young to marry, although Reynold no longer felt the need to control the matriarchs. They were too young and too splintered to be a threat anymore. The resurgence of French culture under the Free Roman realm was once again spreading the Oil vulgar language across Europe, having now supplanted Frankish entirely even at the edges of society. Even one kingdom in Darfur was now speaking French. That being said, Arabic and Greek are still very much so major languages in the Near East, which with some time may change. Beyond that, much of the conquest that Reynold is now doing are lands which were once conquered by his father, which makes them relatively uninteresting. The Roman army at this point is extremely powerful and effectively uncontested anywhere. What looked more interesting was the Mongol Empire, which had been sweeping across the east, already reaching towards Poland. So far, that land which they control is not of any particular value. They still have lots of opportunity to grow though. During this time, the Frankish Romans have been spreading themselves around the edges of the empire more and more, and they started to adapt to what's around them. While at first mostly seen as a ruling upper class, the people of the Seine River have begun to interact more and more with their subjects and are starting to blend in. With that, the culture adopts something of a cultural blending to its ideals. While Hispania was being slowly picked apart by Reynold and his lineage of heirs continued to grow, yet another crusade was being sent his way. It really was irksome having to stop these crusades over and over, but in many ways, it was like a rite of passage for Roman emperors. Every emperor has to hold off a crusade to prove themselves, and this will be Reynold's second crusade. This time he'd have to do it without the matriarchs to carry him through it. This crusade was for England, which meant any piece of the coastline was vulnerable. It's always the largest coastlines that are tough to defend because so many tiny armies can siege so many places all at once. The crusade, though, of course, couldn't win, although this one was a hassle. Either way, the conquests continued up until Reynold's somewhat sudden death. Despite having no apparent health issues and mostly living a healthy life, Reynold passed away at 55, having almost completed his conquest of Hispania and overall increasing the size of the empire quite a bit. Now the realm has been split between his heirs, with the lion's share going to his first daughter, Hiltrud, and his first son, Reynold II, ruling Hispania. Despite the Iberian struggle being ongoing, the laws of Confederate partition supersede the disunified nature of the peninsula. Most importantly though, the two empires might look separate, but in reality, Hiltrud and Reynold II are married to each other, meaning the unification of their realms is only a matter of time. Indeed, the partnership is one of more than just marriage. The two empires, Hispania and Roma Franca, are for all intents and purposes simply highly autonomous regions of each other. The consequence of such a marriage is, of course, that so far all the heirs, Reynold, Failuba, and Ramnulf, are horrifically inbred. But that's fine if it means the family can stay together. For one of the first times, Merovingian siblings will in fact not be fighting each other for land. In terms of Hiltrud's plan for the realm, she continued the conquest of her father, taking more of Scotland and Ireland, as well as partitioning what remained of Hispania with her brother husband. Once Britannia and the rest of Hispania had been conquered, Hiltrud got a little impatient about the whole partnership of empires. Her husband was a lazy man and didn't seem to be doing much with his realm, and she'd prefer to hold the empire for herself. So with that, she began a murder plot to remove Reynold II from the throne. Perhaps a little immoral, but the glory of Rome is based on opportunism, not morality. Once he was dead, Reynold III took control, who was still nominally allied with his mother, Hiltrud. Despite that, Hiltrud attacked him for her claim to the throne, and dishonored herself. It was worth it for the true unification of the realms. The war between mother and son was a tragic tale, which would be written about in Hiltrud's own Chanson de Geste. She was respected but feared and often reviled in the realm for her unladylike behavior. No one could deny the effectiveness of her work, as she expanded the realm to its greatest extent since the old Roman Empire. The now ritualistic slaughter of the Christians, the so-called Crusade, once again appeared to take England. It was of course a complete bloodbath, which was great for the soil of the land, which was happy to absorb all that nutrient-rich blood. Certainly macabre, but still all too true. The question for Hiltrud was where to go from here. As had been asked by so many emperors and empresses before her, what could further the glory of Rome? When every rival has been crushed and every surrounding realm is inferior, what's even the point of further conquest? For Hiltrud, there was something to be said about respect. See, everyone in her realm knows that Roma Franca is the greatest realm to ever exist. But if it were something truly known across Europe, wouldn't these supposed kings be submitting themselves to her realm? They were choosing instead to submit to their apparently fearsome Mongols. What were they doing that was different, or better? Their claim to right of conquest was no stronger than hers, yet kingdoms fell like dominoes to them. She needed to show that her realm was as good, if not better, and so with that in mind, she would expand the empire in massive amounts over a short period of time using the same strategy as her ancestor Everard. She would proclaim that the Romans were once again marching against any errant kings of Europe, and the claimants who were willing to promise loyalty would be welcomed. Suddenly, pretenders from across Europe were arriving in droves to aid in the expansion of the glorious empire. The first of all was Italy, followed by Sicily and Romagna. It was time to take back the old Roman homeland and humiliate the Christians by taking the cradle of their religion. During a Muslim jihad for Egypt, the ever-opportunistic Hiltrud put forward another pretender to take Egypt's throne. Egypt is important both for the identity of the Roman Empire and for its Hellenic holy site in Alexandria, making it hugely attractive. Upon taking Egypt, the jihad defense was transferred to her, and Hiltrud answered by sieging Medina and putting the Muslims to shame. Obviously, if she could fight all of Christendom, the Muslims wouldn't be anything more than a pushover. Her next target was Thessalonica, and after that, she started to clean up some of the borders in Italy. But unfortunately, while on campaign in central Italy, she'd pass away from some bad drinking habits she developed into her old age. She hadn't really paid much attention to her children, although Reynold III of Hispania was now back, this time as Reynold II of Roma Franca. The realm was once again split, this time between the Insula Romanorum of Britannia and Hispania once again to the south. Reynold's brothers in Britannia and Hispania had great realms themselves, although none as great as the new Roman Empire forming before their eyes. Remnulf of the Insula Romanorum had quite the realm, which he ruled over from his capital in Dublin. This was a strange choice, but Dublin was quite the trade centre since the Viking era and was becoming a more suitable capital than London or Wessex anyway. In the south, Hispania was a great realm, which saw its centre hollowed out by Reynold's personal ownership of Toledo. Ruling from the Basque country, Merrill was the emperor of Hispania, and although only a nephew to Reynold, he was still a Merovingian. Before he could reclaim the vast empires he'd lost succession, Reynold would need to prove himself, as his current prestige is rather low. He would do so by taking more and more land across the fractured Italy, and through hosting huge parties and hunts where he could show off his oratory and physical skills. After a few conquests in Corsica and central Italy, he turned his eyes to his nephew in Hispania and went for the throne. Although his nephew was strong, he didn't stand a chance against Reynold's modern and massive army, making for a quick war. That was two pieces of the tripartite empire reunited, but the Roman Isles to the north were next up. Sailing from Normandy to Ireland, Reynold landed in the new capital of Thomond, ready to reclaim the final piece of his heritage. Ramnulf of the Insula Romanorum was allowed to hold on to his kingdom of Ireland as a compromise between the two, since family infighting was often a sign of a dying empire, as was shown with the first Roman collapse. Although it had become a well-established rite of passage to put down Catholic crusades, Reynold was tired of them. The only way to eradicate these crusades was to dominate Italy and remove the Pope from power. The irony of the Roman Empire, which once united and legitimized Christianity, now eradicating its leadership, was not lost on the historians of the time, who were flustered by the rapid changes undergoing Europe at this time. From a unified Rome, to a warlord period, to a new Roman Empire, and the end of the papal authority over Europe, it was quite clear that the Romans were a chaotic force, ready to push and pull the forces of history and bend them to their will. The Pope, Eugenius, a Somali Pope, was executed, and the Christian leadership was eradicated in one fell move. Although Christians would still worship their Savior Jesus Christ in their own realms and their own homes, the United Christian Front of Crusades and their aggression against the Merovingians was finally over. The conquest continued, using either right of conquest in the case of Bulgaria, or a puppet pretender king like for Croatia. These client kings were emblematic of Roman conquest, with the intention to eventually assimilate these kings into Roman culture, or perhaps not to at all. It's fine as far as the Romans are concerned, to just pay taxes and be loyal. In some cases, like with Hildesendus of Nicaea, they were already of an adjacent culture to the Sen Romans, so they were essentially perfect choices. Taking Cyprus, Nicaea, Hellas, and Croatia back, Reynold was able to proclaim himself the Caesar of the old Roman Empire, although he still considered Free Rome to be the true Rome. The symbol that old Rome represented was important for him and his people. This old Roman Empire was renamed to Roma Vetus, meaning Old Rome in Latin. This distinction was to ensure that his subjects understood that his Free Rome was not the same as the Old Rome. They were distinct entities, united under one Caesar. With all these realms united, he began renaming and reorganizing the imperial provinces. He renamed Hispania with a French name since it was a province with a particularly large metropolitan mixture of cultures. He called it Lusitanie Romane, represented by Hercules' pillars and the Parthenon. The once Italian Transalpine Empire was renamed to better represent its diminutive size on Majorca, Sardinia, and Corsica. He named it to Les Îles du Med, short for Mediterranean. This was only a province even due to an inability to decide whether or not those islands were Hispanic or Italic in nature. The best answer was to give them a special privilege as their own province of the empire. The provinces of Roma Franca, Roma Vetus, Lusitanie Romane, Les Îles du Med, and the Insula Romanorum were the major provinces of the empire. For now, Egypt was still governed directly as a territory of Roma Franca, but in good time it will have its own province too. Reynold was just getting started. Looking east at the broken empire of the Mongols, Reynold knew his realm would easily outlast the interwarring Mongols, whose conquests were not nearly as legitimized as his own. For the first time in a long time, Reynold began working on genuinely new conquests in the Maghreb. Looking for claimants was harder in this region since the kingdom was relatively new compared to the long-standing realms of Greece and the Balkans. Reynold had an idea though. Perhaps he could approach the Sultan of Africa as a friend and shower him with gifts. Reynold sent money and treasures to the Sultan and asked if he could look after his son, who he'd taken an interest in as a way to cement a friendship. The Sultan, being a skeptical man, was not too willing to do that, so he told Reynold no, but that didn't stop him. Reynold continued fostering their friendship, and one day, over a game of friendly chess, Reynold proposed the question again. He spoke with the Sultan as a friend, saying, "Sha'ban, your realm is not so dissimilar to mine. You come from nothing, and you have fought for what you have. Life is difficult for rulers like us. We have to claw and struggle for each piece we take. I've observed your realm for a long time, watching it wax and wane, but ultimately prosper under you. You're special, Sha'ban. You will not be a Roman client, but a Roman equal. If that's to happen, I need to welcome your son to spend time with my sons, so that they might get along in the long term. Your son, he may as well be my son, and that's why he must visit Paris. What do you say? Sha'ban thought about it how he would with a chess piece. He put his hand on his chin and considered the ramifications of this action. If Reynold was being honest and wanted a special relationship with his realm, it could mean the world. But if he's lying and steals away his son, it could spell the end of the African Sultanate. Ultimately, the persuasive look in Reynold's eyes and the fervor of his words won out as Sha'ban accepted. Sha'ban allowed Reynold to take his son Abdul Salam back to Paris, and the two formed a friendship over the chessboard. Unfortunately for Sha'ban though, Reynold had in fact hoodwinked him. The moment Abdul Salam reached the palace, he was seized by guards and thrown into prison. The poor boy didn't quite understand what was going on, but he was fed a narrative by the Romans that his father had given him up to prevent his own death. According to the Romans, Sha'ban traded away the life of his son in exchange for his own life and realm. This infuriated Abdul, who was only 14, and offered the idea himself to the Romans, practically begging them to take down his father and put him on the throne. Abdul swore his loyalty to the Romans if they'd exact revenge on his father for him. Reynold was happy to oblige, as his plan had worked swimmingly. The plan needed Abdul to reach adulthood before he could claim the throne, so the Romans held on to him until he was an adult. Once Abdul hit 16 years of age, the war would be declared. In the meantime, another claimant to Morocco came to the Roman court, a woman named Flavia. She was actually a Carling herself of the Italian Buonconte branch. The plan worked without a hitch, as with just 2 wars, North Africa was under complete Roman control. The final conquest was the Saharan Sultanate, for whom there was of course a claimant ready to go, and the smaller Berber states of Tehert. Once the province was secured, Reynold created another Roman province, Carthago Romano, after the ancient rivals of the classical Romans. This empire was marked with a ship in reference to the great navy of Carthage. There was just one last conquest left to fully assert Roman authority and complete the collection of Roman provinces, Aegyptus. Although Egypt was already controlled, it was far too small to be a province on its own, and so Arabia and Syria were taken by a few Matriarchy claimants. Aegyptus was proclaimed with the conquest of Arabia, and its provincial borders ranged from Egypt south to Yemen, north to Syria, and east to Oman. This province was symbolized with a hand reaching to the stars, like the Great Pyramids of Giza. With all this work under his belt, Reynold finally sat down and stopped conquering. It was over. No more claimants, no more wars. Rome was truly complete in all of its provinces. Now it was family time. He's 77 years old and has surpassed every Merovingian before him, and probably all of them after him too. The exhaustion of all of that work really kicked in at this age, and it was clear Reynold was going to pass away soon after he pushed himself so hard. Even while on his deathbed, the Roman legions, led by generals of the army, sought to gain a little more power for the realm. This campaign against Hungary and Wallachia was not led by Reynold, but nonetheless happened under his rule. Interestingly enough, Reynold was well on the way to his death, yet he was not granted a natural death. It seemed his decades of war caught up to him in the form of enemies looking to get even, as he was assassinated without an obvious culprit. Most of the realm presumed it was the betrayed Sha'ban, or perhaps claimant kings who knew that the realm would split upon his death. That it did, as Reynold's death, without taking the time to choose a single emperor, saw each of his many children assigned a Roman province to govern as their own realm. Their Merovingian lineage is truly an amazing series of dukes, kings, and eventually emperors, all beginning with Merovich. The only monarch without any achievements of note is Robert, who was only stopped by being so old. Beyond that, these kings, whether crazy like Sigebald or incestuous like Bernard, accomplished great things. Remember that good and great are not terms which lie on the same gradient. Whether the wanton death and destruction of these kings is good or not is a question for historians to answer, but to call them anything but great is inaccurate. When Karl established a new Roman Empire and Roland broke it apart only to restore it, the Merovingian line proved itself to be a stalwart and undefeatable family. The Merovingians are a lineage which will always rule, even if they're taken down by bad circumstances. We now go to Matriarchy, who rules from Roma Franca as the head emperor of his siblings, each of whom have their own province to administer in his stead. Rome is now broken, but united by family. Matriarchy, the eldest son, controls the symbolic head of the empire off in Paris, acting nominally as the head of the family and all its provinces, although they have much autonomy. To the north in Britain, the Insula Romanorum is ruled by his sister cousin, Dubgilla, who may not live beyond her teen years with her illness and poor genetics. To the south, Roman Lusitania is ruled by Reynold IV, carrying the name of the first Hispanic emperor. Across the Gibraltar Pillars, Roman Carthage is ruled by Hugbert, who's shaping up to be a great emperor, although his ability to control his empire might be questionable given the uppity client kings of the province. The riches of Egypt are controlled by Adelgardus, who has a similar situation to Hugbert as a relatively weak despot in a province full of ambitious client kings. Finally, Old Rome is ruled by Theodelinda, who is defined mostly by her massive size and marriage to a far-off Indian king. Perhaps she just wanted to stop all the inbreeding and bring in a husband from as far away from this inbred family bush as possible. Oh, and how could I forget? The forgotten province of the Mediterranean islands. Bertram rules over Majorca, Sardinia, and Corsica as an emperor mostly in name only, given the diminutive size of his province. From here, I'm going to put the curtain on this family lineage. As I did with the Mughal campaign, I'll be putting the save file for this playthrough in my Discord, which you can go over to and access so you can live out whatever history you'd like to see here. I personally can't think of what else I want to do with this family, and for that reason, I'm sending it off to you. If you do use the file, feel free to share with the Discord what you did. It's a nice community full of all sorts of personalities. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a great time making this series. Also, if you're one of the members that is watching this video early on account of your membership, thank you. It means a lot. As always, thank you for your time.